As an offensive line coach or as a run game coordinator, what are the things that you are looking for when you're scouting for your offensive line? In this video, I'm going to take you through what I look for when I'm scouting and how I schedule it throughout the week. Let's dive in. So we're thinking about how to scout for your offensive line, and the first thing that I think you need to do, so we're talking about scouting for our offensive line, and the first thing that I like to do whenever I'm preparing for a new week is to self-scout. It doesn't matter what you think you can attack for your opponent if you can't execute your own scheme, your own techniques. You know, the Bible says that you got to worry about the plank in your own eye before you can worry about the speck in somebody else's, and I think that really applies here. You know, it doesn't matter what holes I think the other team has if we can't run inside zone right, if we can't run power right. It doesn't matter what I think we can do for the other team, maybe with a secondary scheme or an auxiliary run. It doesn't matter if we can't run our base stuff. So we've always got to make sure that we're doing what we do right first before adding in a wrinkle for the week. How we do that is we're going to watch film. All right, I'm looking to see what worked and why did it work. It's important to not only know what worked, but you need to know why it worked. Maybe we played a 3-down team this week and we play a 4-down team next week. You know, we might think that this run was really good against this 3-down team, but it's not going to be the same whenever there's a 3 technique there. So if we don't know why it worked, then we don't know how we can apply it to the next week. So a couple things that I'm really looking for when I'm thinking about why it worked. Did we maybe just have better players? There's something to be said for being bigger, faster, and stronger than the guy across from you. You know, your technique doesn't have to be very good. If you're that much better than the guy across from you, it just doesn't matter when you get hands on him. So if we just had better players this week, then we need to know that going into next week, because we still need to be talking about things like technique and scheme, because we can't just get complacent, because eventually somebody else is going to be bigger, faster, or stronger than us. So it's great if we have better players, but eventually we're probably going to run into somebody who has a better player than us, and we need to keep working on those things. What I really like to see when I watch film is that what worked because we had good technique, we had good discipline, and we just executed the scheme the way it was supposed to be run. That's how we know we can translate it week to week. So not only do we need to know what worked and why, we also need to know what didn't work and why it didn't work. Were we using poor technique? Offensive linemen not doing what they've been coached to do. Another reason things might not work is if we have worse players than the people across from us. If the defensive lineman is bigger and faster and stronger than my guy, I can use the best technique there is, and it may just not matter. If he's going to go D1 and I'm not even going to play college, there's probably not going to be too much that I can do to get in his way. But on the flip side, whenever we're evaluating that and we know we're going into another week and the guy that's going to be across from me next week is also not going to play college, then I can use the same techniques if they were sound. I just know that I've got a better chance because he's not one of those freakish athletes. Then we also need to evaluate the scheme. Were we calling the right plays? Were they in the right formations for success? If there's somebody coming down into the box that we can't block, do we have a motion that can take care of him? Or do we have another formation that gives us somebody else there? And if we didn't, then that's something that we as coaches need to evaluate. So we know what worked. We know what didn't. We know why for both. We also need to know what can be improved. Again, this can be scheme, could be technique, but there's always something that can be better whenever we're watching our film. And then the last thing I'm thinking about is, what is the opposing defensive coordinator for the coming week going to see? Did we rush for 300 yards on the ground and they're going to say this running back is not going to beat us no matter what? Maybe we had a receiver that broke out and they're going to be focused on stopping him and opening up holes in the run game. All of those things are very important to figure out when we're self-scouting. So step number 2 after I've self-scouted is I'm going to watch the opponent's games. Now, I'm not just going to watch every single game. I want to pick, if we have a couple different games to choose from, I want to pick 3 games, and I want to pick the most recent games against similar offenses. As a spread team, it's not going to do me much good if the previous week the team I'm playing faced a wing tee or a flex bone. Yes, there are some things we can gain maybe for a short yardage or goal line defense, but as a base defense, it's not really going to help me. So, yes, those games do still have value, and I will still click through them at some point throughout the week. Those just aren't going to be the ones that I'm primarily focused on going into game planning. They're not going to be the ones I'm breaking down. They're going to be the ones that I watch just kind of in my extra time as I'm watching film. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to watch the game. And what I really mean by that is I'm not going to put data in. I'm just going to make observations. Yes, I have some things that I will want to take away from these, but I'm not putting data in. It's more just clicking through the games and trying to see what I need to see. So what I want to figure out first is who are they and who stands out good and bad. So do they have some dudes up front that we're going to have some trouble blocking? Maybe we need to find some ways to read those guys. Do they have some players that we can attack on the offensive line? Maybe we know we're going to get a big push if we run at that defensive end versus running at the other one. So who are they? What's their base defense, right? Who stands out positively and negatively? Who are they featuring? Do they have somebody that they're propping up to be the star of the defense? Then I kind of want to notice if they're featuring anybody. Is there somebody they're propping up to be the star of their defense? And it's not always the same person who we notice standing out. Sometimes the other team is featuring a player and maybe we think that somebody else is actually the best player on the defense. So these are two separate observations to make. By the end of these films, I really want to understand the base defense and the alignment rules for the defense. This is really going to help me whenever I go to put my run list together, thinking about how I can manipulate the front. So one key point here, for me at least, is I'm not a coach who wants to just put down the clicker whenever I'm watching the game for the first time. If I see something that I want to make a mental note of to come back to later, I'll rewind the clip. It doesn't bother me a bit. I've heard some that just like to let it play straight through and just watch it and get a flow for the game and everything. If I make an observation and I want to make sure that I actually saw what I think I did, I'll rewind it and I don't feel bad about it because I think I'm making that observation and that mental note to come back to later. So once I have this understanding of the defense and I know really what I'm going to be getting from watching these films, I'm ready to break them down. So in this section here, I'm going to take you through the huddle columns that I use and what I put in them. Number one, I'm using the defensive offensive formation category. And really the reason I like to do this is because, number one, nobody else on our staff uses this column, so I don't feel like I'm hogging it or anything. But we don't always see formations in every game that we actually have in our offense. So whenever we see formations that we don't carry, it gives me a better database to pull from for whenever I have to tag these, so I still understand what I'm actually tagging whenever I'm tagging these formations. A quick little note that I'll make about the formations is I'm not really worried with who's the Z, who's the Y, who's the X. I'm just looking for, if I were to call the formation that's on the field right now, what would it be? So I'm not trying to get very granular with these things and figure out, okay, number 2 is always the Z, or number 10 is always the X, and I have to figure out the formations like that. I'm not that worried about it. If I notice that the offense is doing other things like that and the defense is playing it differently, then I might. But if we're just following base rules and base alignment rules for the defense and they're not getting into anything too crazy and the offense isn't either, then it's pretty easy to just say, if we've got a single receiver on an open side, like on the backside of trips, he's the X. If there's a tight end, he's the Y. If there's a second back in the backfield that's not the running back, then he's the fullback. Those are the kind of things that I'm thinking about when I'm breaking down formations. Next, I'm looking at the strength, and I actually don't like to pair that in the formation category. So I'm not going to say things like trips right in the offensive formation category. I'm just going to put trips, and then I'll put right in the strength category. Now, you can do this both ways, but what I like to think that I'm doing is I can get all my trips or whatever concepts right there in one column, and then later on, if I want to, I can break them down by right and left. Yes, I could put trips right and trips left in the offensive formation category, and then if I only wanted to know them, I could say, okay, I only want to see trips right, but it just makes a little bit more sense to me to parse it up this way, so that's how I do it. Next, I'm looking at motions. I want to be able to just single out motion. Okay, maybe I'll pull up a little playlist of, okay, here's all the fly motions that we saw in the 3 games that I broke down. How does the defense react to the fly motion specifically? That's very easy to do if we have it just in the one category. So we've got the offense's formation, strength, and any motions that they run. Now I'm ready to move on to the defense. First thing I'm looking at is the front. And I break this down 2 parts. The first part, I'm looking at the box structure. So this is going to be, is it a 3-4, a 4-3, a 5-2, a 4-2, or any of those. But those aren't fully descriptive, so I also add the different tags to it. Okay, is it a 4-3 over front? Is it a 4-3 even front with head up 2s? Are they under with the shade to the strength? If it's a 3-4, is it a tight front with 4 eyes or a 5-2 tight front? Mug, when we get the double A gaps, rush, you get double 3s. We get an overload, all those different kind of fronts. I do put these 2 together in the same box. So, for example, maybe we're facing a tight front team. That's their base defense. Most of the defensive front box will say 3-4 tight, just because I know that it's not just a 3-4, it's a tight front variation of the 3-4. And as I'm putting in these fronts, I'm looking for any common threads. I'm going to run some analytics later, but I'm looking to notice, okay, what happens? Does anything change when we bring a tight end in? Does anything change when we bring a fullback in? What if there's a tight end and a fullback and we're in 21 personnel? How are these fronts changing? I'm starting to get that mental picture going before I even run the analytics just by breaking this stuff down. So we've got the offense's look, we've got the defensive front. Next is time to look for any stunts. And by stunt, I'm really meaning a pre-snap shift of the defensive line. Are they shifting strong or weak? Are they shifting from the field to the boundary? Are they shifting from left to right? Now, again, because I've watched the games before, I'll start to get a feel for if they're one of these 3 teams. Most of the time, they're just going to be one of these 3. They either shift strong and weak, or they shift field and boundary, or they're shifting left and right. I've rarely seen teams that do more than one of these, so that's one of the reasons it's really important for that initial watch through, just to get a feel for who they are on defense. Then we're looking at slants, so this would be a post-snap changing of gaps, right? Again, we're looking strong and weak, field and boundary, left and right. And also with slants, we can think about pinches and fans, where pinches, you're taking the next gap inside, or fans, you're taking the next gap outside. From the watch through, you'll get an idea of the first 3. Are they always slanting to the tight end? Does it matter where the tight end is? Then maybe we're starting to think field and boundary. Then maybe you realize it doesn't matter where you're at on the field or where the tight end is. They're always slanting in the same direction, so we start to think more they're a left and right defense. Then after stunts and slants that primarily focus on the defensive line, I take my eyes to the linebackers, and we're looking at the blitz that they'll take. Then after watching the defensive line with stunts and slants, I will start to look at the linebackers and their blitzes. And I just tag these by the linebacker who's blitzing. That tells me all I need to know. The Mike is always the strong side inside linebacker. Jack, in pro terms, I'm a Fangio fan on defense. The Jack is the weak side inside linebacker. Sam and Will are the strong and weak outside linebackers. So whichever one blitzes is just who I tag. If the Mike blitzes, then it's just Mike. If the Sam blitzes, then it's just Sam. If it's a twist, then I'll put Sam X or Will X or Mike X, depending on the linebacker who blitzes and twists. Just for example of some common blitzes that we'll see, jam would be Jack and Mike, both interior linebackers blitzing. Saw would be Sam and Will, both outside linebackers blitzing. Then max would be a 0 blitz where all 4 of them blitz if it's a 3-4. Then the last column that I'm breaking down is one that I've created, and I call it the pressure side. I want to know, is there a consistency to where the defense is bringing their pressure from? A lot of times, especially in high school with the wide hashes, pressure is going to come from the boundary just because it's easier to take that boundary outside linebacker and bring him versus bringing the outside linebacker from the field where he's maybe 20 yards away as opposed to 10. So I'll be looking boundary, field, middle, and double edge. These are really the 4 that I focus on. You'll notice that strong and weak are not on here. Again, because I'm not going to get super granular in this linebacker's always the Mike or this linebacker's always the Will. If he's the strong outside linebacker, he's the Sam for that play. So if the Sam blitzes, they have blitzed the strong side outside linebacker, so the pressure side is the strong side. Maybe they blitz the Sam and the Mike. Then it's still the strong side. What I really want to know when I'm looking at the pressure side is where is the pressure coming from? Really, where do I need to tell my offensive line to slide if all things are equal? So we've input all this data. Now it's time to analyze it. First thing I'm looking for is the front by the formation. This is really going to tell me how I can manipulate the front. If we're in a West formation where we've got a tight end wing pair, what's the defense going to do to that? Do they do anything else to that? If they don't, then we can be very confident that in this formation, this is the look I'm going to get, and we can have certain schemes that work very well against that front. So this is the number one thing that I'm looking for. And a lot of times it doesn't wait until I get to analyze the data. I like to have this done pretty much by the time I've watched through those first 3 games. At least I want to have a very, very good idea of what we're going to get from each of our primary formations. So 2 of the questions that I'm really looking for from this point, number 1, do we have any formations that cause them alignment issues? Do they have a consistently open gap somewhere, or 2 open gaps side by side is a really great thing to see. But do we have any formations in our package that cause them to be misaligned or just to leave a gaping hole, something that they're either going to have to fix in game that they haven't practiced all week, or we're just going to keep blowing up that hole? So what formations cause alignment issues? What fronts do they have that cause schematic issues for our base plays? So do they get into anything that we're going to have trouble blocking? And if so, can we run that play maybe out of a different formation to either add another gap on the interior or to maybe get it? Something we can do is add a tight end to add an extra interior gap and spread out the defensive line, or maybe we can put a fullback in to take care of a linebacker. Those are the kind of things that I'm thinking about when I'm looking at the front by the formation. If it's second and long and they've got an 80% blitz rate and they're sending the house, probably don't need to be running 4 verts because we're not going to be able to block it up long enough to get the ball out. So this is going to influence our pass concepts. And I also like to have this information on my play sheet, especially if there's a strong tendency somewhere, so that I can tell my head coach, hey, it's third and long, probably getting a 5-man pressure from the boundary here, so maybe we need to roll away from it, or maybe leave the fullback in to protect and get a 7-man protection going. Those are the different points that I can make based on this data. Then some of the other data points I'm looking for are, do they have a specific player that they like to rush? Do they always rush the Sam linebacker or the Will? Do they have a certain blitz or a pressure side that they like to come from? All this is going to influence our pass protection and our run concepts. So yes, I don't just always keep everybody the Sam or the Mike, but I'll notice if maybe number 6 is always blitzing, or he's a really good blitzer whenever he does. So if we're in pass protection, maybe we need to always slide his way. It also influences our run concepts. If we know that we're always going to be getting a blitz from the boundary, we like certain runs to the field there, and we like certain runs to the boundary to take care of that blitzer. So it influences that pass protection and the different run concepts that I like to put in the game plan. When I'm watching the linebackers, I'm looking for a couple things. How fast are they? Are they just screaming downhill at the snap? Do they make a quick read and scrape over the top if their guard pulls? What are they keying? Are they even keying the guard, or are they watching the fullback if we have one in? Or are they just getting their eyes lost in the backfield and we can use some misdirection to get them really out of position? And then I'm looking for any tells that they have. Are they in a different stance if they're about to be blitzing from 3 yards? Do they creep up? Do they drop out if they're on the line of scrimmage? Or if they creep up, do they ever bail out? Or once they say that they're coming, are they coming no matter what? All those things are things that I like to be able to tell my offensive line. Like I mentioned, having a column for motion. I want to see what they do to certain motions and maybe how we can get them out of position there. And then something that I really look for is if the elements of the defense that aren't their base defense, maybe it's their change up front, or maybe it's a short yardage or goal line package, do they have anything in common, or is it just a flavor of the week thing? Did we just put this defense in because we're facing a wing T? Or is it something that we can see even if it's just for 5 snaps across multiple games? And what this is going to tell me is if these things translate week to week, then we can have a pretty good idea in this certain scenario that we're going to get this certain front. Maybe it's something like a short yardage goal line front, and maybe we just think we're going to get something different this week because in all these 3 games, when they get into a short yardage or goal line situation, they're in a different front. Why would it be any different this week? But if they're in the same front for all 3 of those weeks and it's different than their base, we can still prepare for that a little bit better. And then I want to know if there's something that they struggle with that we can run. It could be a play, it could also be a formation. Do they have trouble getting aligned to a certain formation? What do they struggle with consistently, and how can we exploit that? So that's really what I'm looking for when I'm scouting for my offensive line. But when do I do all of it? Where does the time come to do all that scouting? Starting with Saturday, again, the very first thing we're going to do is complete the self-scout. Got to know who we are before we can figure out who anybody else is. Then on Saturday, that's also when I like to watch the opponent's games. Again, I'm just clicking through, trying to make some observations, not inputting any data, just trying to see who they are. I want to understand their base defense, and then I want to have those educated guesses as to how they're going to align to our primary formations. I'm going to prepare for our game planning meeting on Sunday. I'm going to figure out what drills we need to do in practice to correct our faults from the previous game. And I really like to include 10 to 15 full play calls to be prepared for game planning, and that's going to include what personnel we're in, what formation we're in, if we have any motion. It's going to include the run scheme, and then maybe a tag if we have it on that run scheme. 10 to 15 full play calls can really take you a pretty long way on Friday night. If you're not a up-tempo team, then we're getting about 60 plays on an average Friday night, 60 to 70. And if we have 10 to 15 full play calls and we can flip them both to run them right and left, that's 20 to 30 play calls. Then hopefully of those 10 to 15 plays, hopefully 5 or 6 of them turn out to be really good, and we're going to come back to them a couple times, maybe 3 or 4 times each. Maybe we're going to come back to 3 or 4 more of them, another 2 or 3 times. Next thing you know, you've got 40 run plays that you run on Friday night of your 60 to 65 plays. So that's a pretty good list there for me. I'm really happy with 10 to 15 full play calls that I believe in. And what I'm looking to do in these play calls, again, is manipulate the front. So I'll have an idea of how they're going to align and what play call can I put in that's going to give us the best front for that look. I'm also trying to know who their best and worst defenders are, especially if there's somebody that we need to read because I know we're not going to be able to block them. And then I want to study those linebackers. Again, do I always know they're blitzing if they cock that certain foot up? What are they reading? How do they adjust to motion? All those things are things that I want to know going into our meeting on Sunday. So looking at Monday, again, Sunday's all about game planning, not doing too much scouting there. That maybe is a quick meeting and I get time to do some tagging on Sunday, then I can, but that's just a bonus. Monday, I'm primarily looking at tagging the offensive information. Again, the formation, the strength, the motion, and then just the defensive front. What's the box structure, and what are the variations like tight front, over front, and things like that. So pretty much Monday is going to take me up to the snap of the football. What's the formation, the strength, and the motion? How is the defense aligned to it? That's primarily what I'm focused on Monday. Then on Tuesday, looking at more of the post-snap stuff, the defensive information, stunts, slants, blitzes, and what side the pressure is coming from. Now, some weeks this takes a lot longer than others. If you're facing a blitz-happy team, this is going to take all of Tuesday and some of Wednesday. If you're facing a team that blitzes a pretty normal amount, normally it can be done on Tuesday by Tuesday afternoon, and maybe you have time to get a head start on the data analysis. What I really want to do with the data analysis is just see if it matches my observations. Again, by the time I get to this point, I'm going to have watched each game at least 3 or 4 times, probably more. So I'm going to have those observations and really going to know what I'm expecting. And I just want to make sure that the data matches what I've seen so far. The analysis is where I'm going to get my down and distance blitz percentages. And then I want to see if maybe I've missed a formation tendency. Maybe there's a formation that we don't have in the game plan, but we've run before, so it wouldn't be too difficult to add at this point in the week. And if I see that they're going to align a certain way to it 90-95% of the time, and we know exactly what we're going to get, then we can put 2 or 3 plays out of that formation just to see if they pop on Friday night. And if not, it wasn't a primary part of the game plan anyway, but that could be a pretty cheap way to get a couple really good plays if we know exactly how they're going to line up and we have that formation in our offense. Again, Tuesday's a really big blitz day for me and pressure day as far as when I'm scouting. It's our first day in pads for the week too, so if we have to have some blitz periods, we can get linebackers running full speed, and I can tell my offensive linemen, this is what you need to look for. If I haven't picked them up by then, I'm really looking to see if we have any blitz tells from our linebackers that week. So moving on to Wednesday and Thursday, if Tuesday's a bit longer of a breakdown day, then I want to finish my analysis on Wednesday, and then I'm really reviewing practice film. My scouting is complete. The rest of the week is just checking just to make sure I haven't missed anything when I get a couple minutes here and there to watch some clips. But primarily, I'm watching our practice film. We've got the idea of what we're going to see. We're practicing against that look, and are the things that we're doing in practice the things that we need to be doing on Friday night? Are they working? Is the scheme working the way we thought it would? Is the run hitting in the right place? Are we making the right calls? All those things are things we need to think about. What's working? Again, kind of treating this like a game. If it's working, why is it working? Do we have good technique? Is it just a good play against that formation? Is it working because we're going up against a scout team? We're not going up against our ones because our ones are playing on offense. So are we just overpowering? Again, are we just the better player than the guy across from us? That's something we need to know too. On the flip side, if it's not working, can it be fixed? All right, is there a call or check that's not being made at the line of scrimmage that we need for this play to work? Is it a formation that we need to change around? Maybe we need to add the tight end on one side instead of the other. Maybe we need to bring a fullback in to block a linebacker. Maybe we're not using the right technique. Those are things that can be fixed even on Thursday. And if it can't be fixed, then maybe we need to talk about just removing it from the game plan entirely. And then on Thursday, it's time to put the hay in the barn. We've done all the scouting, we've practiced for it, and it's time to get ready to go on Friday night. So we've talked about what I'm looking for when I'm scouting and how I spread it out across the week. If you want to know how to practice against the things that you're scouting and seeing on film, click this next video and I'm going to take you through my drills for the offensive line.